Hello there, welcome to saberduelgaming, where we always take the high ground, and welcome to a retro review of Super Mario 64, a game I've been looking forward to reviewing for a very long time. This classic game that came out on the Nintendo 64 in 1997 was the peak of an evolution of Super Mario Bros. Games that finally leapt out into true 3D. Super Mario games have always been one of the flagship games being released alongside a new Nintendo console. Prior to the Nintendo 64, the SNES was released alongside Super Mario World, and the original Game Boy was released alongside Super Mario Land, so it was no surprise that a new Mario game was going to be released with the Nintendo 64. What was a surprise to many Nintendo fans when they finally saw pictures and indeed video footage of the game was just how impressive it truly was. The Super Nintendo Entertainment System had really solidified beautiful graphics in 2D platform games, and it had also started to add some perception of three-dimensional gaming as well, Star Fox being a key example of this, and to a lesser degree, even games such as Super Mario Kart. But when this game came barging onto the scene, it blew anything like that away. Even the PlayStation, with the advantage of using a disc rather than a cartridge, which had created very successful games such as Crash Bandicoot and Spyro, were not even remotely on the same level as visually what we saw here in Super Mario 64. Many people had seen videos of it. Yes, they'd actually released video cassettes along with computer game magazines for people to watch footage of this game, and trust me, people watched it on repeat. But the question would be, how would it actually play when you bought the console and inevitably plugged this game in first? Well, from the very start we were introduced to some beautiful visual graphics. The moment you plugged the game in, you were confronted with a malleable Mario that a lot of people spent a lot of time playing with. But once you actually logged into the game, you had multiple files you could use, you were jumping through paintings and seeing different worlds, and each world you saw you had multiple tasks to take part in. It wasn't just one level, just once. You had multiple reasons to jump back in, from collecting the red coins, to blue coins, to completing particular missions, rescuing penguins and shooting off into the sky in cannons, to jump through hoops and face different challenges each time. The depth of not just each world, but the scope and variety of these worlds was truly staggering. There was something for everyone, and while certain tasks could get a little bit repetitive, we had a lot to do and a lot to explore. So for Mario games, this was something quite new, and something a lot of fans enjoyed. The storyline was nothing revolutionary. The princess has been kidnapped by Bowser, again, leading to us going across different kingdoms and different levels, searching for, in this case, enough stars and enough keys to open up certain doors, be able to access new paintings that transported us to new worlds, and so on, until we finally fought Bowser again and again. But who really cared? Nobody ever played Mario for the storyline. They played it for the gameplay, the simplicity of it. And with this game breaking away from that simplicity, it was going to be the gameplay that either made or broke the Mario franchise and this game. Can you guess what happened? Yeah, I think you can. The gameplay was fantastic. It was incredible. Yes, okay, there is the one flaw, and I'm going to throw it out there right away. We're going to get it out the way early on. The camera angles in this game were at times lax. That's something we'll talk about a little bit more later on, but at this point, we hadn't really seen 3D to this level, to this point, so in reality, it was still the best we'd ever seen. And the gameplay, the depth, the variety, the longevity, it was incredible. Drafting new elements into the Mario game whilst keeping the visual style and general feel of a Mario game in there made it everything that people had loved in the past, but also something new. Sticking with the platform model whilst branching into 3D is kind of tricky. it doesn't work in the same way. But Super Mario 64 managed to match that platform style, along with aspects of adventure, exploration, combat, and even puzzles that hadn't really been seen in Mario games before. The fact that once you were inside the castle, you could open up a few different worlds to explore allowed gamers to avoid getting too fed up with that one level or one mission they just can't beat. If you were struggling with the third star in one painting world, you'd jump out, go into a different world, and work through some there, and eventually come back to the one you were stuck on. So people didn't have that usual grind that they normally needed in a platform game, where that same part kills them over and again. But when you did it, that progression was awarded. Once you had enough stars, you could fight Bowser. Once you'd progress past that, you could open up a whole new selection of worlds. This really allowed the player to avoid getting too bored, but also to constantly feel rewarded for trying to push forward in the game. It was the perfect balance between challenge and reward. As with all Mario games, it wouldn't have been complete without a variety of pickups that allowed Mario to transform. In this case, it was a number of caps that allowed Mario to either develop wings to fly, become metal, or pixelated so that he could move through items. These were accessed by first hitting switches in secret levels that allowed certain blocks placed around all the other levels to become tangible, and then usable. So how did it score? Well, incredibly. Look, this was a game that was getting 9s out of 10, way into the 90%. There was no rating lower than that, not from anything with any credibility. The game was one of the greatest games that had ever been made at this point, so let's just leave that there. There is nothing else to be said. However, what we can question is whether it still stands up now under modern scrutiny. And in this situation, we have a few interesting ways to look at it. You see, on the release of the Nintendo DS, they decided to make a port of this game with improved graphics called Super Mario 64 DS. It also added 3 new characters to play along as. However, what was noted was just how poor the controls were. Many people still love the game because it's still Super Mario 64, but the controls do let it down. However, these seem to be more to do with the controls of the DS rather than the game itself. The game has since been re-released on the Switch, and the controls work generally fine there. And if you go back and play the original on the Nintendo 64, the controls are still much better, so I think that DS version has to be put to one side. What can't be ignored, however, is that the camera angles that were slightly an inconvenience back then are borderline criminal now. They really do get in the way and become quite annoying while you play. However, that's probably the only real flaw. The graphics in games have improved since then. They look more like actual cartoons, but other than that, there's not really much improvement. The style and gameplay and the charm this game has easily matches and probably surpasses that of Super Mario Sunshine or Super Mario Galaxy. It could maybe have benefited from a 2-player mode, but this is actually something they tried to add originally. The game just couldn't fit it in, so they cut it out quite early on, and realistically, that's not something that I ever really missed back then or now. Interestingly enough, playing it now, I probably appreciate the absolute beauty of the soundtrack as well, more now than I ever did back then. It really is breathtaking, and it deserves something of a mention on its own. It's no surprise that in a recent re-release of Mario games on the Nintendo Switch, the soundtracks of this game have actually been added as an optional extra. This game, and the Nintendo 64 as a whole, really fits in a strange place in gaming history. Unless you saw it at its release, you probably can't appreciate just how earth-shattering of a change this was, both graphically and in terms of gameplay and audio. It probably hasn't quite hit the point of having the same retro appeal that 8-bit and 16-bit games have. However, neither of these should get in the way of realising one undeniable thing. Playing it back then or playing it now, this game is absolutely beautiful and so enjoyable. The camera angles are the only flaw, and they do not get in the way of this game still, easily earning a 9 out of 10 rating. But what did you think of Super Mario 64? Let me know in the comments, and please feel free to subscribe here on YouTube or over on Instagram or TikTok.